We heard so much about the importance of education in establishing peace and harmony. How do we go about, through the help or use of education, to attain peace and harmony? This is a question that I think many of us have in mind. To answer that question, we would like our next panel, they are the experts, to answer those questions that you have in mind revolving around how to make use of education to establish peace and harmony. It's our pleasure to invite His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Sayyad to be our moderator for our next panel discussion. Mr. Ahmed Sayyad is the Ambassador Permanent Delegate of Yemen to UNESCO. He is also the President of PAHD Association. His invited speakers are His Excellency Mr. Ghazi Gherairi, Ambassador Permanent Delegate of Tunisia to UNESCO. His Excellency Mr. Mounir Anastas, Ambassador, Alternate Permanent Delegate of Palestine to UNESCO. His Excellency Mr. David Measketh, Ambassador, Deputy Permanent Delegate of the Kingdom of Cambodia to UNESCO. Last but not least, Professor Medwin Hughes, who is the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Wales, Trinity, St. David. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together and welcome the panelists.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. So we are now going to continue our discussion. And I hope that at the end, after we've heard the various speakers, that we will still have time to hear from the room so that you can ask questions and perhaps even express your own viewpoints. The issues we'll be looking at are of essential importance, especially in this organization, UNESCO, i.e. education. How education can contribute to building a society of harmony and peace and tolerance and respect. These are key questions, and they lie at the very heart of the mission statement of this organization, which was set up essentially for education. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we will get straight down to business. We will first hear from my friend, the Ambassador Permanent Delegate to UNESCO, who is also a university professor, Mr. Ghazi Gherairi, and he will talk about ethical and moral education, a source of harmony and peace. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I address this ambitious issue that I've been tasked with, and I think I was rather bold to agree to speak to this very complicated question. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers, in particular my friends from the Association of the Friends of Master Ching Kung in UNESCO. And as I'm sure you have noticed, they have gone to the trouble of organizing a very high-level and sophisticated open event focusing on these issues with all the different participants. So it's my job to talk to you about something that I think is of capital current importance. Let me later try to explain why it's current interest. But before that, let me say that I'm speaking here as representative of Tunisia in UNESCO, something I'm very proud of, but also on the basis of the experience I have garnered over many years teaching in Tunisian academia, in particular at the Carthage University, where I taught public law. The question of education and ethics with a view to creating harmony, in my view, requires us to identify a certain number of concepts in advance. Is it up to the school? Is it the school's job to set an example? Or is it the school's job to teach how to be an example? Maybe for some people that would be the same thing, but I have to say that I believe they are not exactly the same. This is not the same type of mission. Ethics, that's to say, introducing the preoccupation with education, at the end of which the teacher and the trainee are imbued with ethical values, I think raises a certain number of fundamental questions. The way in which education is organized, say, structural, administrative, pedagogical issues, should we follow that ethical line, in which case we're talking about the governance of teaching, or despite and notwithstanding governance questions, should we focus on the output of that teaching, that's to say, the graduate, the student, the trainee, in whom we try to ensure a certain level of ethical training? I think this is a genuine issue, and there are probably two answers to this question. Quite clearly, our preoccupation must be with passing on a certain number of ethical and moral values, but also I think we cannot credibly transmit them if the teaching institute itself does not meet the standards of ethics, transparency and good governance. So let me give you a few examples. If we teach pupils values such as equality, fraternity, harmony, for example, and the way in which the education system works does not guarantee those values, I think the message is distorted, because the vehicle for transmission of those values is not in line with those values. And this is the first thing that I think we need to consider at the outset. The second thing, in my view, relates to the question of ethics itself. Can we talk about this in the singular or the plural? It says ethics, but is it one or is it several ethics? Is there a possibility for harmony between different ethics in our increasingly diversified and open societies? Should we consider this a plural? That's to say, we teach young generations the importance of ethical values, knowing that moral and ethical questions can be approached from different standpoints, within different contexts, different levels of intensity. A society that is essentially agrarian probably doesn't run by the same set of morals as an industrial one. A society that is highly populated, different from a sparsely populated one, probably they don't have the same ethics. The third point that I think we should consider at the outset is the question of who is passing on the ethical message. That is to say, those who are invested with the task of building the teaching program and passing on these messages, that's to say, the stewards of the system, the guardians of this message. Surely they have to be credible in terms of respecting those values if they are to pass them on. We often see what I would call pedagogical schizophrenia, that's between the content of the syllabus and the vehicle for conveying it, that's to say, the teacher or the teaching materials, a book, for example, whether in paper or electronic form. This is a fundamental question. Now, why am I asking these questions here today? simply because if we're going to approach education through the prism of ethics and morals, I think, as you see, it's a difficult issue. It's about people, the personality of those passing on the message, but it also depends on the teaching materials we have. So I think we can already see how complex it clearly is to address this question. The second level I want to approach this on is to what extent there has to be a voluntary system, because one cannot believe that a school can create a harmonious society or strive for one if there isn't a clearly defined desire to do so, enshrined in the education system itself. Let me give you an example. It's probably the easiest, most comfortable one for me. My country, Tunisia, in 2014, adopted a new constitution following a democratic revolution, and we addressed the question, what is the role of schools in the founding law of a country? There was a very long and heated debate. I can lead some extracts later, and I can tell you that there was a very wide-ranging and heated public debate about this, which shows how important the school system is for our society. But this afternoon, I think I'll just pick out a few passages which will show you the kind of choices that were made. Article 39 of our Constitution, 2014, says that teaching is compulsory up to the age of 16. The state guarantees the right to public schools free of charge at all levels. So that is the fundament of our system. Then, skipping over some parts, I come to the passage that interests us most. It's the state that is being referred to. It says, it shall ensure that Arabic as a language will be consolidated and made widespread, disseminated, and it guarantees access to foreign languages and cultures. This is really something that goes to the heart of our subject here. This teaching shall contain information on human rights. So it is designed to give them certain characteristics of pride in their country, but above all, it has to make them open to others and human rights. There is an article on this. It says then in the Constitution that students must be open to foreign languages and cultures, which means understanding others, rapprochement with others, having humanistic and humane relations with others. So we've seen that our state has intended to include the culture of human rights right across the teaching system and make sure that we transmit to our students the values underpinning this. Now, I'm not some naive lawyer. I know that an article in the Constitution must set a reality, but it's a good starting point because it forms the basis on which our educational system is built, and it needs to meet that standard. So the question today of the relationship between ethics and schooling and perception of others through school and through schooling is the very heart of our system. This is UNESCO that we're at, and one of its main mandates is education. The question of education requires education for peace, and that means that you need harmony. The balance in school programs, school syllabuses across all levels means that we have to find ways of giving students the way to identify with the roots of their culture and society, whilst at the same time treating equally and equally important that of others and holistic humanism. So when we talk about other societies, we mean other people, others who are different from us and don't necessarily look like those in our own society. This is a difficult and perilous task even, and when today we look at society in the broadest sense in our country, we can see this is absolutely indispensable that we include, both in the structure of school governance and teacher training and the structure of our syllabuses and the way this is passed on to students and their learning of others with a view to harmonious life. This is a key and fundamental aspect of what we do, and it's the way in which we, in any case, believe we can provide the most appropriate response to all the forms of intolerance that we see today, in particular those that unfortunately take the form of violent extremism. The Tunisian delegate, along with the Australian one, of leading the group of UNESCO Friends in Education to combat extreme and violent extremism. How can we do that? It's not by putting in our school programs platitudes saying there's something wrong with extremism or that it's evil. What we have to do is build on the relativity of relations with others and better understand others who have different cultural, religious or societal expressions. When I say societal in the broadest sense, relativize these relationships. What does that mean? It means remove any stigma, if there are any, in certain societies. There can be stigmatization of characteristics of otherness or minorities. This requires the use of three vectors, as I said: school governance, teacher training, and, of course, school syllabuses and teaching material that are the means for passing on this knowledge. It's not about form, it's both form and substance, but it's all essentially very pragmatic because this process has to be properly suited to pupils' age, their level of education and their social environment. This pedagogical message has to take those factors into account. If we now try to conclude on that particular aspect that I've modestly tried to set out before you, and I hope I'll have the pleasure of discussing this with you afterwards. In my view, there is a capital point that must be included in this type of action. And that is that we must not believe that at some time a school program or syllabus can claim absolute truth in an exclusive manner. This exclusiveness will necessarily have an impact on those who follow the program, the students and pupils who receive this information. So this relativity, this absence of exclusiveness is a hand outstretched to others, and it's the key prerequisite for building a society in which ethics of this sort can prosper and harmony is well or even very well observed. So, and this absence of exclusiveness an absence of conviction that these programs and those who teach them are invested with a single and unquestionable truth is the necessary prerequisite. If we don't have that, we cannot talk about ethics or harmony. Obviously, it's easier said than done, because all of this presupposes preparation, as we've seen, and adaptation to levels of education. But I think that in a place like this, UNESCO, it's important for us to place this value on the highest priority position, the relativity of our educational programs. Over history, recent history, all those who felt that they held the one truth have led to the systems and societies that have failed, specifically because there was a lack of respect and consideration for others, and therefore absence of ethics and harmony. If we can already agree on this, and each within his or her own context tries to provide for that pedagogical context and form of transmission, then I think UNESCO will have already achieved a lot. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, mon cher ambassadeur.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that excellent presentation, showing us the linkage between education, ethics, morals, all of which form the essential basis for harmony and peace. I am now going to ask my friend, His Excellency Ambassador Mounir Anastas. He is Ambassador and Permanent Delegate of Palestine to UNESCO.
Bonsoir, merci beaucoup.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. As the previous panel was essentially English-speaking, ours is going to be mainly French-speaking. In the name of cultural diversity, I'd like to thank His Excellency, Mr. Ghazi, the Ambassador Tunisia, because he's taken some of the words out of my mouth. My presentation is called Which Education to Promote Peace? As you know, peace is something that we need more than ever all around the world, but certainly in my part of the world for a very long time now. More than 70 years, almost a century now, we've been searching for peace, and I, like the previous speaker, will draw inspiration from my own experience and from what's been happening in Palestine. You know, President Abbas stated very clearly that he rejected all forms of violence and said that resistance has to be peaceful. This is part of a culture of peace, and it's also something we recognize that this deserves acknowledgement because it was the head of state that called for this, and peace cannot be genuine without the active involvement of the peoples concerned. Now, turning to the subject at hand, I'd just like to remind you that we need perhaps to redefine words. Peace comes from pax Latin, a period of calm marked by absence of violence between human groups. However, peace is not just about absence of conflict, because there can be different types of peace. The absence of conflict, the absence of war, is one form of peace, but not according to its original definition. If we wish to achieve genuine peace, there must also be reconciliation between populations or peoples or groups concerned. It's not just the absence of conflict. If now we turn to education, in fact, education is not just about knowledge and transmission of knowledge and skills. It's the way in which people and individuals trained religiously, morally, socially. Morally, this is about ethics and education, ethical and moral education, as addressed by the previous speaker. He also talked about the role of state institutions that I'll come to a bit later. So, education also aims to ensure that an individual can develop all capabilities. In that sense, it is not supposed to focus on any particular viewpoint, but enable the pupils or students to clarify and learn more about themselves That's to say, develop critical thinking. Education, as you know, in France and other countries, we talk about education and teaching. Education is not just teaching. Education is a responsibility shared between the state and parents. Education starts at home before it continues at school and university. We focus mainly on schools and universities, and we often forget the role of parents, which means that, in fact, we should not so much talk about teaching education for peace, but rather teach education for moral education, and actually talk about the transmission of these values. That would be natural, that it be passed on from generation to generation as a sort of tradition of intangible heritage. This is something that we can see as an ideal to be strived for. If we want to talk about education for the promotion of peace, or I would say education for peace, so there are all these different roles. When I say the role of parents, this means they have duties and responsibilities. The role of states and universities is to meet their responsibilities, as we've heard from the previous speaker. Now, if we just want to answer the question, what type of education for peace or to promote peace, I would say the answer is very simple. We need education based on ethical and moral values, as referred to in the previous presentation, and as was also said, this means self-respect, but also respect for others above all. And second very important point too, is that we need to be aware that we are part of a whole. A whole means society, different humans, but also part of nature, which means respect for others and respect for nature. And today, that's what people call being ecological or environmentalist, often forgotten in the past. But coming back to the question of peace itself, it's an ideal that has been the goal of mankind since the beginning of time. But an ideal, by definition, is something you can't really achieve. Or it can be achieved, but one never knows when. And I think that will be when ethical and moral values are not taught, but transmitted. Then we will be able to talk about genuine peace when they're passed on from generation to generation. So, leaving aside the role of education, I think peace can only exist under certain conditions. And these conditions have to be created. So, one condition will not be enough. We need to create them all. And this brings me back to more down-to-earth issues. For example, sustainable economic development. Economic development is the basis of development of states at all levels. It means that a state can have a budget, whether it be for education or for culture or other purposes. A little later, I will come back to the role of culture and teaching of artistic disciplines. And we have to respect all human rights. They must be respected to genuinely guarantee that education for peace can be passed on. Gender equality, one of UNESCO's priorities, has also been a goal for centuries. We're making slow but steady progress. And last but not least, democratic participation. And democratic means all citizens in a free and equal manner. And then development of tolerance and solidarity. The spirit of solidarity is vital because we can see that this is growing on the international scene. Whenever there are natural disasters around the world, the countries that are able to provide assistance do so rapidly. This is what I mean by the spirit of international solidarity. Education for peace also means active promotion of peace and dialogue between the various parts of society, respect for others, respect for dignity and sharing. So you can see that this forms a whole when I talk about education for peace. And this starts at the youngest age because one starts to learn these values at home. And without these values being passed on at home, the role of the task of schools and universities is increasingly difficult. Now, before I reach my conclusion, I think what we need to do is look now, because we're talking about the future, about what will guarantee that we can have a genuine spirit of education for peace. We therefore have to focus on young people.
I think they really are our target, so that we can actually lay the base for a form of education for peace, which can be adopted as a translation and which can, as a tradition, which can be transferred and not taught. Let me come back to teaching in schools. And here I'm talking about school education and not university education, and teaching the arts in schools. Now, I think this is very important, and it's linked to peace. You may ask, maybe 10 years, but this is not the case, because if you look at music, for example, most music is a form of prayer, and most prayer worldwide is expressed through song. It's a way of calming the spirit and heart. There is, I think, Ronsard who quoted, I've forgotten the exact quotation, but he says something like, music calms the mind and the heart. So the role of music is indispensable. And it is also one way of understanding other people, of learning about other people, and being open and tolerant. When you look at music and forms of music, of course, this is quite obvious, but it's also the case with painting or sculpture or film. Any artistic form allows young people to learn about other cultures and traditions much more in an immediate and in a faster manner. To conclude, education for peace is an international movement. I don't think you need any reminding of the different resolutions adopted here at UNESCO or in New York at the United Nations. But it is looking for new tools so that it can respond better to people's expectations. Our societies are evolving, and the impact of technical progress is obviously very real, and it can be used for peace or for war. I think it is a two-sided sword, so one must be careful. Education can also be a tool which can be used in two different manners, and we have to make sure that we are using it for the right reason. The education for peace allows us to find the peaceful settlement to differences and to different conflicts, and helps us to resort to peaceful settlements rather than to force. And this is, after all, what we are looking for continuously. Upstream prevention is the best way of limiting conflicts in our world and their devastation. Education for peace is the best way of preventing these outbursts of violence in our world. Thank you very much.
Merci, mon cher.
Thank you very much, Mounir, for this excellent presentation. And we can understand that as a Palestinian, being an advocate for peace takes on a whole different meaning, and we need world solidarity to help us finding just and lasting peace. Allow me now to give the floor to His Own Excellency Mr. David Measketh, who is the Ambassador and Permanent Deputy Representative to the Kingdom of Cambodia.
Bonsoir tout le monde.
Good evening, everybody.
Je vous avouerai que quand le maître Chin Kung, que je remercie ici,
when Master Chin Kung asked me to make this presentation, and I'd like to thank him for having invited me, when he asked me to speak on this subject, which is monumental, I was, of course, daunted, but also very grateful. And I think what I'm going to say is in keeping with what the two previous speakers said as well. As you know, Cambodia was also the place and a country that was attacked and has been through many turbulences and conflicts. Dear Master Chin Kung, dear venerables, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I think we all know that community life in our societies has already lived for a long time. Man has lived as a community. And the aim was to live in safety and in peace. The resources were shared by the members of the community, and everybody could therefore contribute in their own manner to the peace and harmony of the society. Since then, many things have moved forward. There is a great deal of understanding, but there is still much to achieve. It is unfinished. And our societies today are facing new threats that jeopardize this harmony. So the question that comes to our mind is to try and understand what has caused this distortion and disruption of harmony. And it is obviously a very complex subject, and the way in which we are trying to address this question is through the angle of education. Education is at the base of all socio-economic transformations of societies. Nobody can doubt that. If you have free education up to a certain level, basic level, which would allow everybody to fulfill their basic obligations. However, we can say that education cannot be summed up with mere slogans, be they political or pedagogical. I think these sort of slogans may be sincere, they may be believed in, but they are incomplete. And therefore, finding a form of education for children who cannot actually go to schools full time, or education which is aimed at illiterate adults is a completely different spectrum. And so we've got to understand and try to harmonize this differently. The aim should be harmony, after all. But before we get to social harmony, we've got to reach human, individual harmony. Durkheim said that education is a powerful tool in the socialization of the human being because it allows social solidarity to take place. Teaching in classes is a way of sharing the most precious values and get children to learn. Teaching of history is extremely important. It is in this way that society reaches out to students. Children learn to be proud of their pasts, be they historical, political, or social, and to respect them. And therefore, education is a way in which the culture from generation to generation is passed on and down. It also encourages faithfulness to the basic tenets of social cohesion, and it also leads to active participation in our societies. Therefore, education over the long run creates a bed of values and also the basis for national cohesion. This is why, if education were to be accessible to all, it would enable overcoming all the divisions and fractures that exist in our societies and will allow a greater harmony to be created in our world. Despite understanding these issues, children worldwide from the poorer sections are frequently excluded, and there is only a small percentage of children who can actually get the basic 8 years of education. So reaching out for social tolerance is something that all peoples yearn for. Whatever your cultural or traditions may be, the ideas of man has always been to reach out to a better understanding between peoples and nations. Of course, interdependency is something which has practical reactions and effects, and they also mean that we have to have a new look at the old ways of behavior. So how do we, in our societies, respond to these challenges? It will have an influence on whether we will become outward-looking or more introspective, particularly because the educational system in most countries gives children and the youth basic fundamental sciences such as exact sciences, mathematics, physics, and chemistry, facts. And therefore, the human element frequently is missing from these curricula. And the question of harmony and dignity lacking. Therefore, it would be a good idea to find an education which emancipates young people from a very narrow vision of the world. Of course, one should continue teaching exact sciences, but education should also try to promote human values. This is the way in which we can lead to harmony in our societies. Of course, education can help us in a great way to achieve this, so that we can fully achieve our potential. And in this way, we can actually develop personality and the basic values that are vital for our societies. In this way, we can all become creative contributors rather than being forms and contributors to disharmony. Now, obviously, this is only possible if we include values and basic principles, moral principles in young people. In education, we must work towards fulfilling man. It is not just facts and data that has to be packed into our brains. That is not what education is all about. Education is about creating, making people. Values are psychological and social values, and these, in fact, help young people and children to better understand who they are and where they have come from. From the very early ages on, it is important to express these different thoughts and feelings. It leads to a sense of solidarity within families. After that, of course, we can absorb any other form of knowledge, whether it's the most modern, technical, or mathematical, or even more obtruse. Education also means that individuals have to learn what their relationship with others is or represents, instead of merely using adverse and negative expressions. One must first look within and try to learn more about oneself. And therefore, in education, we've also got to encourage group learning, interactions with groups as well, based on values, teamwork, and group work. And this will mean that working towards a harmonious society is possible. It is vital to educate the individual, but not in an egoistic way. The idea of unity in diversity is indispensable in these teachings. What we have to start thinking about is finding a form of education which is based on values, lofty ideals, which will allow people to reach new levels of excellence in developing their human characters. Education should encourage people to think about how consensus can be achieved. It will allow the mind and the heart to be enlightened, and in this way reach better harmony within and without, be it spiritual or material, and also better understand the potential that lies within all of us. It develops personalities, it develops the understanding of oneself. This new way of dealing with education will also build self-confidence. Self-confidence, as Gandhi said, is better understanding one's real capacities. By understanding one's true identity, we will therefore be able to understand our real nature and therefore be able to achieve happiness. Education, therefore, is the way that we can understand the true nature of man and the true requirements. Education in this way will allow us to develop common sense. Share that. Gandhi has stressed the importance of building one's character, which leads to social harmony. Education for him was not merely an adventure or looking inwards. It's also got to be a permanent questioning of what one hears and what one is doing. In education, we should really understand and try to understand more. So I think in this way we can better understand the forms of coexistence that exist between us and in our different societies. It is a continuous process, and it allows us to be critical, but at the same time in harmony, and arrive at a social harmony which will allow us to better understand the values of man. To conclude, I would like to underline that education, for it to be truly effective and for it to introduce social harmony, should not be pure rhetoric. Education should allow us to prepare for life and also prepare to live well in harmony in our societies. All great thinkers and philosophers have understood the excellence of man. They have real faith in man. They know that when the heart and the hand works with the brain, education will be complete. The general trend is to concentrate on the brain and on religious philosophies, on ideals that were based on values. But if we introduce these values in early childhood learning allows young people to develop mentally, emotionally, but also intellectually and ethically. It therefore creates a social mass which allows us to truly understand what society needs and to change it, allows us to reach harmony and social progress. This, after all, is what allows societies to go forward. If society is capable of achieving this, then the aims of harmony and education will be achieved. Everyone says that obviously education should allow us to constitute, to build the individual or the individual's character. So these forms of education will allow us not only to educate but also to achieve participative and social balance and harmony.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear David, for this excellent contribution. I would also like to thank, personally, David, I would like to thank you for your commitment to our association. You've been working with us from the very beginning, ever since we set up the association, that is the Friends of Master Chen. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Professor Medwin Hughes, who is the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Wales, Trinity St. David. You have the floor.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Amitofo. I've been asked to address the subject of how does education and how does university education relate to some of the key themes that we have addressed at this conference. How does university education focus and support interfaith and intercultural dialogue? We have often heard the Venerable Master note that education is the soul of a nation. Not only is education the soul of a nation, but also it captures the spirit of a nation. It captures the spirit of people. And it has been clearly attested today and yesterday that there has never been more of a need within our communities and our societies than now to articulate what does faith literacy and what does cultural literacy mean. There is certainly a growing recognition that intercultural and interreligious dialogue is at the heart of social and political debate. Faith literacy, cultural literacy, is key in establishing a meaningful context where cultural diversity is recognized and that global citizens have the freedom to celebrate who they are and what they believe. This Honourable House has clearly shown over the years that for peace education to really mean anything, it has to mean the freedom to say who I am, to stand for what I believe, and also to articulate that in a context of harmony and of peace. What does it mean to say, I am religious within the 21st century? How do we create a meaningful space where people can stand together and yet celebrate distinctiveness? Creating an environment based upon respect, on tolerance, on acceptance is essential. And it is key that we develop professionals that have the analytical tools to be able to link traditions, to compare traditions, and to see the common good between traditions of faith and of culture. But what does it mean to have faith? Faith, after all, is confidence. Faith is trust. Faith and trust in a particular system of religious belief. As we know well, and as the policy statements of the House have shown over the years, it is absolutely imperative that we develop a discourse that celebrates the freedom of individuals to be able to stand together and yet respect tradition and belief. And education is at the heart of that. I'm minded of the study that came out of Berkeley University, out of the Center Religion, Peace and World Affairs, where they articulate very clearly the importance of the common ground. And if I may, I'll quote one sentence from that excellent report. Effective dialogue can establish a common foundation. It can confirm a common humanity. It can open space for the other in one's own religion. Effective dialogue creates space. It allows the individual to have the freedom of inquiry to consider who I am and also how I relate with others. One humanity, many faiths. And one of the issues that the University of Wales, Trinity St David has considered after following the leadership of the Venerable Master Ching Kung is to ask the question, what do we need to develop as appropriate frameworks of inquiry that allows us to consider the importance of faith, of interfaith, and how do we identify a language, a commonality of language that brings people together to be advocates of peace, of truth, and harmony. The commonality of language is key. We have heard today and yesterday the importance of identifying those commonality areas. The Abrahamic faiths have all identified that. They all enjoy the worship of one God, of justice, of mercy, who requires a human commitment to the same qualities. Islam, as we know, holds the principle of the oneness of humanity and shares with Christianity an understanding of God as compassionate and merciful. And also we know from the Sikh tradition that the unity of humanity is at the core of identifying a common language. But how do we articulate that? And how do we develop future educators to look to one humanity, many faiths? The common understanding that we have of tradition is key. But at the University of Wales, Trinity St David, we have tried to articulate a framework that allows a new generation of scholars, of educators to come together to consider the role of global harmony and peace and to focus upon interfaith, intercultural dialogue. The professional doctoral program that has been developed at the university through the support and generosity and sponsorship of the Venerable Master has allowed us to develop a conceptual framework that brings together young scholars that have an opportunity to study together, to engage together, and to inquire together. What does it mean to focus upon faith and on cultural dialogue? They, as individuals, have the opportunity of working with the scholars of the university to articulate and to clearly demonstrate that it is possible to inquire and to show respect to one's tradition of faith and also respect to the other. The key focus of the postdoctoral fellowships has been to focus upon some of the key resolutions of this House, and in particular, the resolutions that focused upon the International Decade of Rapprochement, the promotion of mutual understanding, the building of a common framework that supports social cohesion and cultural cohesion. The doctoral program offers us the opportunity to study the world faiths and the religious traditions. It allows us to create a space where we together can consider the commonality issues and the interfaith dialogue issues between different traditions. It creates an opportunity for us to look at sacred texts, the importance of hermeneutics, and also the traditions associated with faith. This is a professional degree that prepares individuals to be animators, facilitators of cultural change, of cultural engagement. The Venerable Master has noted very clearly that the heart of an education system is a good teacher. Sage education focuses upon integrity of message and also integrity of belief. We know that we live in a troubled world, a world that calls upon leaders teachers, educators, to be true to themselves, but also true to common values and common traditions. And the degree that has been prepared by my university, the University of Wales, Trinity St David, through the leadership of the Venerable Master Chin Kung, allows us now to develop a conceptual framework where methods and approaches towards interfaith studies are brought together, where the traditions, the critique, allows the students to test ideas, to look for commonality issues, and to consider the best of faith education and cultural education. We'll have an opportunity now to listen to the professors within the university and also to some of the students that are currently on the scheme.
Imagine a university set in the beautiful Welsh hills, with the amenities of a market town just a stone's throw away. A university far removed from all the pressures of urban living, where within minutes you might be walking in the Cambrian mountains or surfing along the Cardigan coast. Imagine a university where everybody knew your name, where you counted as an individual, where your voice matters, where you have the freedom to be yourself, and where you are part of a close, friendly community. Imagine a setting where a long academic tradition stretching back 200 years, where an Oxbridge quad nestles side by side with modern, iconic buildings, and where studies are pursued in harmony with an historic campus environment. Imagine a university that takes your needs seriously, where you receive the support and encouragement you need, and where staff genuinely care about you and your academic progress. Don't just imagine this, come and join it. Come and pursue your love of subject in a place, an atmosphere that is utterly unique.
My name is Dr. Angus Slater. I'm the Programme Director of the Harmony Interfaith Professional Doctorate Programme here at the University of Wales, Trinity St David in Lampeter. Here in Lampeter we have 15 doctoral students, all fully funded through the generosity of the Chin Kung Multicultural Educational Foundation, studying aspects of the academic study of interfaith studies and also the practical implementation of interfaith work. All of our students live on campus and take part as part of a research college, which encourages them to experience living in a multi-faith environment. We recently held a conference here in Lampeter on interfaith studies during the summer, to which we invited prominent scholars from around the world to come and interact with our students on matters of interfaith study. The conference went off very well and it was enjoyed by everyone who attended, academics, religious leaders and students.
Wel, nifer o bethau, nifer o syniadau nawr i'w sefydlogi ac i cymryd nhw ymlaen. Da ni'n gobeithio bydd yna gyfrol o ysgrifau yn deillio o'r trafodaethau hyn. Ond hefyd dwi'n credu bod yna bwyslais mawr wedi bod y dyddiau diwethaf yma ar weld y gwahanol bethau ydym ni o fewn diwinyddiaeth ac astudiaethau crefyddol yn ei wneud yn y brifysgol, gwaith profiad crefyddol, ymddiriedolaeth PAHD, gwaith ydym ni'n wneud gyda sefydliad Chin Kung, materion rhynggrefyddol, pwyslais hefyd ar ysbrydolrwydd o safbwynt Cymreig, ac yn hytrach na gwneud yr holl prosiect yna ar wahân, mae'r wythnos hon, mae hynny wedi bod yn gyfle i ni weld y cysylltiadau rhwng y gwahanol weithgareddau hyn da ni yn wneud o fewn y brifysgol.
What I really like about this program is that it is an applied one. The fact that a lot of interfaith work is restricted to theological and theoretical stuff, and the fact that here you get a real sense of a balance between the on-ground reality and also the theoretical framework of interfaith. I think that is where it actually makes sense to me, because you practice what you learn, and the fact that you're living with people from different culture and faith backgrounds together here, you get to actually live the experience of interfaith in the real sense. The fact that Lampeter is an ideal place to study these kind of things is because It's really calm, and it has that welcoming environment for people to resolve their differences and understand and celebrate diversity.
If people would like to find more information about the program, then we have our website, which is ifdialogue.com, or please get in contact with myself, Angus Slater, or my colleague, Catherine Williams.
So often we've heard in this House the Venerable Master mention the need for practical examples. Words are never enough. What we need to articulate are practical examples that can demonstrate, that can clearly show that evidence is so important. And you heard there one of the students note, what I like about this program, it's a practical program. And what we have tried to articulate are those core values that we have learned from the Venerable Master, focusing upon faith traditions, and to secure the highest standard of scholarship, so that we critique, we develop an appropriate academic environment for the students, and then we relate that to practical opportunities of learning. The students themselves were asked, what do you envisage the mission of this work? And it was very interesting to know their answers. After a year, they realized that the opportunity of spending 3 years together within a community of learning allowed them to evoke empathy across traditions, to be part of a cross-cultural communication opportunity, to secure a connected relationship across traditions and faith, and hopefully to embed the values of effective teaching, core values of sincerity, of truth, of justice within different religious contexts. The product that this university will create after 3 years and the outcomes that we will achieve, we hope to develop a body of doctoral students that can engage in community initiatives, in regional initiatives, in initiatives here within this house through the work of the Venerable Master. A body of doctoral students who can evaluate the world's ancient religions, the text, the sacred text, and not only place those within a historic context, but to ask the question, how do they relate now to issues within our communities? The doctoral program supports harmony and peace education. It fosters religious cohesion. It creates a common space where all traditions can come together and learn from each other, where there is common respect for faith, for belief, and a common will of working together to secure one humanity within a global world, and celebrating the faith traditions which are so important for our civilization. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And we are here, all of us, very happy about this cooperation between your universities and Master King Kong. I think we need to develop more this kind of cooperation because we need that. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, with this intervention, we come to the end of this intervention, but we will open the discussion. I am sure that you have some question, maybe ideas, then the floor is yours.
I have a question to...
Please, there is some question here from Mounir, from the Ambassador of Palestine.
Thank you, Excellency. Actually, I have a question on the last intervention of Professor Hughes. Actually, you mentioned that I don't know how many students now, doctorate students you have. I thought that the discipline was only an optional study, not a specialty, but since there are doctorate students, this means it is a specialty. And what would be the work after their studies? Thank you.
Please.
Yes, you noted that there are 15 students. We hope that over the next year that there will be up to 20. I noted the word professional, and I think there's a real need in the context of organizations like this House for cultural animateurs, of individuals who can link across traditions. We know how important it is to develop cultural advocates. Advocacy is important, and effective teachers, not only within the traditional educational school system, but in applied systems as well. And one of the key features of this degree is that it not only focuses upon the sacred text, upon the detailed classical tradition of the scholarship, but hopefully can consider that within applied context as well of faith and cultural tradition. The key issue for me is to develop faith capital, and with faith capital comes social and cultural capital as well within our communities.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Yeah, please.
Bonsoir. Good evening, good afternoon. I represent a network of NGOs that partner with UNESCO, and I would like to congratulate the organizers on these 2 wonderful days, to be followed by a third tomorrow. And I have to say that I'm hugely struck and impressed by all these proposals and everything that's said, these words of hope for our young people. And I have a question in my mind, because there's been mention of examples, role models. Where are they? Where are the role models for these young people that we're encouraging to spread peace and harmony around the world? And I'm wondering, I think there are a few, but is that enough? Because there are places on this planet where wars are being waged around the world, where people do not have access to food, healthcare, or peace. And young people are urged to do what today is not being done. So almost as a flippant quip, could I perhaps express the hope that there could be a school founded to give all governments around the world a second chance, whatever their economic or political colors? Thank you very much. Yes, unfortunately, war is everywhere. I come from Yemen, and I know what war is: killing children, where schools are being destroyed every day. We have 2 professors here, so I will give the floor to the professor who's ambassador for Tunisia, and then the other, because they are the people who work with the young people in universities. Thank you very much for assuming that I'm able to answer this question, which will doubtless encourage me. Well, I have to say that I share a lot of your concerns, which I think I referred to when I spoke. I do not believe in the existence of role models, but I think we can build exemplarity. And this is what I said most often in my short statement. What we need is relativity. I think previous individuals, earlier generations, failed in this because they tried to promote perfect, unique systems, methods that were supposed to contain the one and single truth in these educational systems. So I wouldn't talk so much about governments, but the way in which we can put together this pedagogical message and pass it on. There's nothing to say that mankind is incapable of building something that takes into account its diversity and relativity. I would like here to pay tribute to the representative from Cambodia who made this presentation on history. This is somewhere where we have to show humility. and stop trying to train people on the basis of one single view of history, the brilliant ones who succeeded and the bad ones who failed. I think there is a process that we can consider, getting slowly closer and understanding relativity. And there's nothing to say that there will be a split between those who are good and those who are not. There's good everywhere and there's evil everywhere. This is a key message. It's a salutary message, and just because attempts have failed in the past, pretty much everywhere, this doesn't mean that there is no chance of success. Otherwise, what's the point of our being here for these 2 or 3 days? We're here because we believe that there is a way out through harmony and respect for others. There are processes that have been more successful than others. That should give us hope. But we need to see where the education transmission systems have failed and try to leave that behind. But I do not believe that today there is anywhere or any civilization or any nation that has met all expectations in that sense. We still have to achieve that, and therefore, even in a house such as this, UNESCO, that's the key question. Multilateralism needs to be virtuous multilateralism. And the place for that is here. Just because this didn't exist in the past, there's no reason why it can't exist in the future. I am convinced by a French philosopher in his message, which he said, pessimism is a mood, optimism is about determination. And that's what we need to do. We have to make sure we use the means to achieve this end. Everything I said, which I think is very much in line with what was said after it, is something I believe in, but thank you for your questions.
Merci, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Merci. Et faut constater que je me suis pas trompé.
Well, apparently I was not mistaken in believing that you could answer. Professor, would you like to have a stab?
Well, I think the Ambassador has noted very clearly, I think, the key tenets of the question. If we focus for one moment perhaps on youth and on youth leadership, I think it's so important that we do celebrate where there is good practice. And one of the things that I've been very impressed with the work of UNESCO is through the youth leadership program that brings individuals together across the world. It's so important that those exchange opportunities are there, and that youngsters, youth, the leaders of tomorrow, that they have the opportunity to articulate their own agenda. It's not for us to say this is the agenda for the future. And yes, it's good to identify role models, but we have to have confidence in the youth of today as they articulate their own leadership for tomorrow. And one of the things that I'm very keen to promote within the context of the work of the Master Chin Kung in partnership with university, how do we train future leaders, youth leaders? And I think it's absolutely key that we give them the creativity, the tools to be the leaders and the facilitators of change. And yes, there are good role models, but it is up to us to make sure that the exchange opportunities are there, that they learn from each other, because together they're a very powerful force for peace.
Thank you. Maybe the last question, if you have, because we must respect the time. So, thank you very much.
I think all these presentations were so clear that manifestly there's no need to ask questions. Let me thank you all for this afternoon, for your contributions. Thank you, each one, and I will now give the floor back to our moderator. Thank you
very much. We would like to... Thank you for sharing with us how we could actually leverage education in establishing peace and harmony. I'm sure there are some educators in the audience, or even for those who are in one way involved in education or another. Your discussion would definitely benefit every one of us. Thank you very much. We're coming to the end of day 2 of this conference.